Hey, welcome to Black People Die by Suicide 2, our new set. You've probably noticed that we've had some changes with our set over, the past few months and throughout the episodes, but this is our new home, our new setup, the new aesthetic, as the kids say. So we just wanted to film this and let you all know that, the set's going to be consistent. We were just kind of playing around to see what we liked, and this is what we got.
Yeah, I know. And for me as a person, as a marketing, communications, branding, that's my thing. I was like, Lord, I know what those people probably like. What is black? Is white?
It's green,
Is
it's grass.
green? What is grass? What is going on, y'all? But no, we really did like listen to your concerns because there were a few DMs that came in that people asked about and just offering feedback on how we can improve the podcast. So just know that we're always open for feedback. So like anything, you can send us a DM or you can send an email to info@blackpeoplediebysuicide2.org. We always want to improve the podcast, and so we're happy that this is our new home. We think it looks great. Shout out to Digital Empath because they're doing an awesome job. So we are we're very excited. So we just ask that y'all bear with us. The one of the things that I've learned from this process is being open, because I initially remember when we first started the podcast, Leon would ask questions like, do you want this? Do you want that? I don't know, Leon. And so one of the things that I learned is that to start something, if you have something that you want to do, just start it. It does not have to be perfect, and you don't have to have it all figured out. There are so many things that you will learn along the way. And there are, as we've been recording and having guests and doing all of the everything related to the podcast, I've been learning like, okay, this is what I like. This is what I don't like. This is what I want to improve. So that is something that this process have also taught me, because I can tend to be a bit of a perfectionist. Jordan knows, she works with me. So we hope that you all enjoy the set. So before we will begin to have our first episode that you will see with this wonderful set, will be with the amazing Dr. Rita Walker. She will kick off. So, but for now, we have some episodes that were pre-recorded. So I'm just letting y'all know, when y'all see this, we putting this out now for y'all so we can address the changes
Right.
in the set.
Right.
But y'all gonna get some white background and some grass. And then once the grass is over, then you gonna get this set.
Yes, we again, as T-Kea said, we're so open to feedback. Y'all, I'm gonna try to talk louder, Lord. My mom calls me mouse mouth. She say I talk like wee, 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 wee. So I'm gonna try to do better and project if you couldn't hear me. But yeah, so this is the new set. I hope you like the way it looks. I think it looks beautiful. It's aesthetically pleasing. So
Yes. So thank you all for bearing with us. Thank you so much for supporting us. We are so grateful. We ask that you continue to support us. Our goal for 2024 is to grow our YouTube channel. It's YouTube is a beast, but we are determined to make sure that our channel continues to grow so that we can get this content out and help change the world. So thank you so much for supporting us, you all.
The information presented in this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for clinical mental health treatment. If you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis, please dial 988 or head to your nearest emergency room.
Hello, everyone. This is Jordan, co-host of the Black People Die by Suicide 2 podcast. This episode is going to be a little bit different. We know many of you missed our first in-person live event, and we wanted to present that information to you all. We had some technical difficulties with the sound at the event, but again, the information was so great, we had to make sure we passed it along to our viewers and listeners. So without further ado, enjoy the episode.
All right, so coming to the stage, we have Jillian Pelzer, Jordan Scott, and T-Kea Blackman. each of these amazing individuals will just take time to share why they are presenting at this event, what this topic means to them. So, Jillian, is it all right if we start with you?
Is my mic on?
Yes.
Everybody can hear me? Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Jillian. You guys can call me Jill. I am the owner of Graceland Therapeutics, which is a mental health agency based in Lanham. And I'm so excited to be here with you all today. My personal connection to suicide and suicidal ideation is I lost my father to suicide in 2008 when I was 15 years old. And that is kind of what drove my whole career and has made me want to become a therapist and kind of do events like this today and raise awareness about suicide in all communities, but specifically in BIPOC communities.
Okay, hopefully you guys can hear me. Great. My name is Jordan Scott. I am the co-founder of Black People Die by Suicide too. My personal connection to suicide, I have depression, anxiety, and PTSD. And I've been hospitalized multiple times for suicidal ideation. And of course, the topic's important to me because I want more Black people to talk about it. It affects us. It's not just a white issue. So
I mean, I have had this. My name is Black. My I'm a suicide attempt survivor, and I also lost my 13-year-old cousin, Najuan, to suicide. So that's why I'm really passionate in terms of talking about mental health, and that's my connection to suicide. It's happened twice.
Okay. Perfect. Um, so when we talk about suicide in the Black community, oftentimes there is a lot of shame, right, or stigma that comes with it. Why do you think there is such a stigma in regards to suicide within our community?
Okay. So for me, I think it's a lot in terms of with stigma. I know a lot of times growing up, I always heard like only white people go to therapy or rich people. So I never thought therapy was for me. And I think of it also has to do with, unfortunately, a lot of things go back to slavery. And so when you talk about generational trauma and then even seeing certain people attend or go to therapy, it's always been very white. And I think so, yeah, I think for me, I think that's kind of what it was.
I know for me, as Black people and especially Black women, there's an expectation that we have to be very, very strong. We always have to hold it together, take care of our family, go to work, take care of the kids, make sure our spouses are okay. And it's almost like we're not allowed to be vulnerable. We're supposed to be robots. We have to always keep it pushing. And I think that's part of the issue why it's so stigmatized as well.
Yeah, I was going to say similarly that I think when you hear about mental health or therapy or worst case scenario, suicide, you're essentially admitting that you have a problem, that something's wrong, that everything is not perfect the way it may look on your Instagram feed or what people may think about you or the idea of you that they have in their head. It doesn't necessarily always align. Which just sounds ridiculous, right? Because we're all going to have problems. We're all going to deal with different things. And the more we try to hide it, actually, the worse it gets. So I think that's why there's such a stigma and kind of piggybacking on what Jordan said. I think that for people of color, there's this kind of expectation for us to be tough and strong and keep everything private and nothing leaves your home. So definitely a topic like this would be something that you would keep under wraps a lot of times.
So I would say going back to the slavery thing, it came back to me. So, or did it just leave? So If I think about it, I'll come back. Go ahead.
Um, when you guys were giving your introduction, it was really interesting to note that um, all of you, like you mentioned, have a connection in regards to suicide, right? For two, it was family members who died by suicide. For two of you, also, it's you had your own personal experience within the family dynamic. How did the perception of suicide um, impact your family? So were you more hesitant to share with your family? And for those that lost a loved one by suicide, were you hesitant to share the reason for their loss?
I'll go.
Okay.
I know for sure I was very much hesitant. I had never experienced anything like that in my life. I was only 15, like I shared. So that was like my first experience with mental illness, suicide, depression. So for me, the last thing I wanted to do was to go back to high school and tell everybody that I had lost my parent, in that way. I was more embarrassed than anything else. And I shared on your podcast that it took me years to even start telling people the truth about how I lost my dad. It wasn't until college that I started really telling people the real reason. So definitely shame, guilt, embarrassment, all of those really big emotions come with it.
Okay. All right. Um, okay. Sorry. Uh, when we talk about the shame and stigma that comes with that, I love that you guys mentioned in regards to like also this perfectioner, right? Needing to be perceived, especially in the eyes of social media. When you talk about family, right? It's I need to be perceived well. I need to have it all together. Jordan, you mentioned being the strong Black woman. T-Kea, you mentioned in regards to slavery of how we adapt this mindset of like just pushing forward, right? Like I'll deal with it tomorrow. Just keep going and not realizing the impact of that. Um, However, we must acknowledge that suicide is on the rise within our community. And I kind of want to just hear your input of why do you think, outside of some of the stigma and shame, why is it on the rise within our community?
Well, I think one thing that kind of speaks out is police brutality, especially when you talk about with social media. So constantly being exposed to violence all of the time. I think that has an impact. Also, a lack of access to care. Many Black people are insured. So I think that also plays into it as well. Um, and then I think Jill also mentioned social media as well when you're talking about the need to be perfect or kind of make it seem like everything is so picture perfect. So I would say those are some of the reasons. And then also, as you would know as a clinician, there are also not enough clinicians to meet the demands of all of the people who need treatment. There are so many therapists that have like wait lists for months. So I would say those are probably some of the reasons.
Yeah, I agree. I worked at a med star, one of the hospitals, the emergency room during the pandemic, and one of the things that I noticed was the uptick in children, like Black kids that were actually coming in for suicidal ideation. There was a point where they had to just keep them in the emergency room. There was literally nowhere to send them. I'm pretty sure Shepherd Pratt might be the only hospital in the state that actually has like an inpatient juvenile program, and it was completely full. They had nowhere to send them. Like that's how many kids were coming in during the pandemic. So I do think the pandemic played a huge role in, increasing suicidal thoughts, especially among children.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And I think that after COVID, trying to reintegrate back into normal life definitely played a role too, because I think a lot of people experienced mental illness during the pandemic that they might not have realized before that they had. And then kind of living alone with those feelings for 2 years, whether or not you had access to care during that time, and then trying to jump back into going back to work, being social again, being around family, being around friends. You might have gained weight, you might have lost your job, you might have had hardships, you might have had a loss. So there's just so much that's wrapped into what we experienced with this global pandemic. And I can definitely see, as a clinician in independent practice, the aftermath that we've had of that, from the social anxiety to the suicidal ideation and everything in between.
I know you guys mentioned social media quite frequently, and kind of want to be a little bit a devil's advocate, right? Do you think that social media, like some of these feelings and thoughts, were already present, and by social media posts by therapists, right, and therapists of color or others, like your podcast, your organization, right, where it's shining a light on, once again, a much needed topic, has allowed people to get access or to admit that they need help?
Yeah, I would think so. And I think because more people are being vocal on social media, especially like TikTok, that's like one of the most keep it real social media platforms. So I would say, like you said, yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword because social media can be bad, but it's also great because I know I'm someone that's very vocal on social media as well as other people. And then from also, it's important for Black people or Black children to see Black therapists on social media as well so they can see, oh, therapy is for me too.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a double-edged sword. There's a lot of comparison with social media, but I also think it really can help make people feel connected. I myself, I am a long time isolator. Normally, Takia will text me like, "Hey, what are you doing?" If she hasn't heard from me in a little while, but I think it's a good way for people that otherwise wouldn't form connections to actually be able to talk to other people and see that other people are going through the same things that they're going through, and also find support.
Agreed.
Following that, I know when you talk about like, hey, this I've been feeling this way, right? Or we talk about like family or community. For those who maybe suicide or suicidal ideation is new, right, to them. They don't know how to help a loved one. What are some of the signs and risk factors for someone, if you care, like, just what should I be looking out for?
Definitely, you want to pay attention to changes in behavior. So, for example, if you know somebody is typically always on time for work, really cares about their job, really passionate, and then all of a sudden you're seeing a decline in their functioning in any way, social life declines or increase. So, I always like to remind my clients, change doesn't have to just mean like, oh, everything in a negative way, right? You might have somebody who typically is a homebody and now all of a sudden they're going out and they're partying every night, they're drinking all the time, they're high all the time, and that's atypical for them. That could be a sign. Not even necessarily just suicidal ideation, but depression in general, maybe anxiety, who knows? Um, Social life, overall functioning, hygiene, believe it or not. If you're noticing that maybe your loved one is not showering as much, or maybe is not taking care of them as well, their hair isn't typically a mess and now it is all the time, that could be a sign that they're giving less energy to themselves, caring less about their appearance. Isolation, as Jordan mentioned, loss of interest in things that typically they were interested in before, any changes or deviations from their norm. And I think it's really important to, for as wrapped up as we are in so many things, whether it's yourself, your job, your kids, really paying attention to your loved ones and kind of figuring out what their baseline is, meaning how do they typically function, and paying attention to any deviations from that.
Yeah, I would add paying attention. We go back to social media posts. Sometimes people will post things indirectly as well, like a certain lyric. So that's something to pay attention to. I know I would say right before my attempt, it was probably like 2015 or 2016. I was definitely someone that posts things indirectly, and people will be like, "Wait, what does that person really mean?" So that's also something to pay attention to. If they're giving away like prized possessions as well, something that means so much to them, it's like, and it kind of gives a sense of like farewell. That's also something to look out for as
Yeah,
well.
I was gonna mention that, like, if someone gives you something that's really valuable to them and they say, like, for example, I won't need this where I'm going, you can have it. you might want to follow up with some questions like, hey, what do you mean by that? Definitely if someone that literally says that they're thinking about either hurting themselves or, I don't want to say commit, but dying by suicide, definitely take those things seriously because a lot of times we do say something, whether it's directly, indirectly, there's usually signs that someone's considering it.
And just really quick before we move on from this topic, from this question, a lot of times when people are asking for help or actually making comments, that's typically a sign that they genuinely do want help. And not, assuming that most of you guys in here are not clinicians, so no one is expecting for you guys to know exactly what to do or who to call or what to say, right? I'm a clinician, and half the time I'm like, I don't even know what to say, right? Because we're all human. We don't know how to stop somebody from making the choice that they're ultimately going to make. But the idea is just being a support in whatever way that you can and whatever way feels most natural and comfortable for you. And then where you lack, trying to find resources to kind of fill in that lack, right? You guys are all just one person, and it's not on you to try to fix another person. All you can do is be the most of a support that you can. But just to piggyback on what I was trying to say, was that typically when people bring up that they want help, they genuinely do, right? So I always encourage people not to be scared of suicidal threats or people, your loved ones, talking about suicide or bringing it up. That typically means that they actually do want some sort of help, or they at the very least want you to know that they're feeling this way. If they just wanted to do it, they would just do it, right? They wouldn't ask or tell anybody who would essentially try to stop them, if that makes sense. So take all threats very seriously, but don't be afraid of them. I would actually be encouraged by them because that means that there's still hope for the person.
So piggybacking off of that, because I'm like, that was literally my next thought. When there was a question, and once again, sorry for the technical difficulties, but one of the questions in the survey asked this, and it said, if I bring up suicide, right? If I talk about suicide, does it make someone inclined to do it?
So I can answer part of it. No, because if the person is already thinking about it, and so I'm a mental health first aid instructor, and one of
Okay. Can you break that down of what that means?
oh yeah.
Okay.
So because if a person is already thinking about it, you can't put the thought in their
Wait, what if mental health first aid?
if that is, sorry, got it. So, mental health first aid is a course that teaches you how to recognize signs and symptoms of mental health challenges and also how to effectively respond. Because sometimes we think we're saying things, but we're actually making it worse. So, there is a section in there that talks about suicide. And within that section, one of the questions is, would you put the thought in the person's head? They're already thinking about it. And by you asking the question, it's just shining a light on that dark place. And I always say there's a point in the training where we say, ask everybody to take their mics off mute and say, asking the person, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about dying? Are you thinking about suicide? Because it's like a breath of fresh air. I wish in 2016 when I had my attempt that someone would have been like, Key, are you thinking about killing yourself? Because it would have been like, oh, thank God somebody asked me. But I was afraid because if I would have said something of, stigma, how they might have viewed me. But again, it's just shining a light on that dark place, and it gives the person the opportunity to just be honest. So they may not say anything, but no, you don't put the thought in their head because they already are thinking about it.
And a lot of times, just the average person might not even recognize what suicidal ideation is, right? Which is why talking to a clinician in therapy is probably your best bet. Holla if you need me. But yes, bringing it up and actually talking about it, and preferably, excuse me, with a professional who can kind of help you sort these thoughts out, and you can learn the difference between like what a passive thought is, what an intrusive thought is, or what of like an active suicidal intentional plan is really helpful for you as well, because I'm sure we've all had those thoughts pop into our head of like, oh, I just wish I could like go to sleep and not ever get out of this bed, or like what would happen if I just like run this car into this wall, like these intrusive thoughts that just pop up. you might have that and not recognize that that could be a sign of suicidal ideation, or that could be a sign of anxiety, or it could just be a sign of depression. When you have these thoughts in your head, that's all they are, is just thoughts that are just kind of ruminating. But when you actually talk about them and bring them to life, that's where we can really get context, meaning, and hopefully solution.
T-Kea, I wanted to piggyback off of something you just said earlier. You had mentioned in regards of being direct, right? And I, as a mental health professional, I learned this in school, right? But there's a difference between someone wanting to harm themselves, right? And harming themselves doesn't necessarily guarantee that they are suicidal. And so if you all like I could just shed light in regards of what is the difference, and did you experience for those who did have like suicidal, whether passive or active, was it the combination of self-harm as well as suicidal ideation, or was it just, and not to go in depth, but just to kind of give shed some light on the differentiation of the two?
So, do you want to take
Mhm. So, in terms of passive versus active suicidal thoughts, passive thoughts would be something like, again, as Jillian mentioned, man, I wish I would just go to sleep and not wake up. Or, um, you know, what would happen if I steered my car and I hit this tree that I'm coming upon? You know what I mean? Active suicidal thoughts is something like you're actually formulating a plan to die by suicide by some means. Whether you're, for me personally, um, I could tell you that I spent
Take your time.
many nights with a bottle of pills in my hand, thinking I could just take them and just be done with it, and I wouldn't have to feel this pain anymore. And that would be something like an active suicidal thought.
So you have the plan, the intent, and the means to do it. So whether it's the pill, it's the gun, it's the rope, that is would be more of an active suicidal thought.
In regards to harm,
Oh, self-harm.
mhm.
So when, and that's another thing, and Jill, you might want to expand on it. So when you talk about, because if someone say I'm thinking about hurting myself, there's this thing called NSSI, non-suicidal self-injury. So that can be burning, cutting, pulling of the hair. So hurting doesn't necessarily mean suicide. So that's why you have to be very specific and ask the person, are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Because hurting, that's not as direct.
Yes. And also, a lot of the times, especially for teens or kids, um, self-injurious behavior really has a lot to do with mindfulness, right? Wanting to quiet out the noise, wanting to focus on nothing but this one thing, right? It doesn't always mean that they want to kill themselves. It doesn't always necessarily mean that they even want to inflict harm. I have a lot of clients who say that they just want to see blood, or that they just want to feel something because they feel numb so often. So if there really is, it's important to figure out the context of all your thoughts and behaviors.
And seconding what Jill said, right? Sometimes it's a trauma response. It's not necessarily like you mentioned. It's kind of just wanting to feel something outside of what else may be going on, whether it's in school or in the home. Okay.
So when we talk about, so I didn't disclose, which a lot of some people do know. So I started struggling with suicidal thoughts when I was like in middle school, but I couldn't like put the name on and be like, yeah, that's a suicidal thought. I just knew I wanted to die, and often ways of doing it. And those thoughts really carried me until my 20s, my early 20s, when I had early to mid 20s, until I actually had my attempt. So I always like to tell people, imagine having cancer for over 10 years. You would probably be dead, and if you didn't get treatment. So that's kind of like how I felt internally. I felt like, dang, I've been dealing with this since middle school. Here I am in grad school and I'm still struggling with these thoughts. So I already felt dead internally. So I felt like at that time I was just matching what I was feeling on the inside.
You brought up a great point, right? In regards of terminology, and when we talk about other sicknesses or illnesses, right? Cancer, right? You hear someone's like, oh, they died of cancer. And then they'll say, oh, okay, this was the type. They died of a car accident, right? But in I've seen a change recently, but typically when we talk about suicide, it's they committed, right? What does the weight of committed suicide mean, and what is the correct terminology that we should use?
So I'm gonna also let Jill talk to this too, because she mentioned it on the podcast. So I do have other clinicians that are actually a psychiatrist. And she informed me this a few years ago and saying that committed is usually like wrongdoing. So, like, committed a sin or committed a crime. And it also places blame on the individual. Like, saying, for instance, when someone has cancer or diabetes, you don't say they were committed to their death. It is the mental health challenge or the diagnosis that influences their thoughts, their behaviors, and their actions. So it's actually not that the person is committed to their death, it's an illness. And when she said it, I'm like, oh, I never thought about it that way. But a lot of people in the mental health community are really trying to change the language because you don't want the person to feel like it's their fault. And it also gives more compassion to physical illnesses because it's like, oh, cancer took them away. But it's like, oh, yeah, no, they were committed to their death. And so that's another thing, is talking about compassion and actually seeing mental health diagnosis as an actual illness. And so that's how it was educated to me. And so that's why I'm very strong on not saying committed suicide, even though some people choose to, that's their right. But after being educated by a psychiatrist, I've decided that it's best to use that language because you don't want to say wrongdoing or make the person feel bad for sometimes something they can't always control.
Yes, I have no rebuttal. I agree. I think that that is a very person-centered, which is always best practice approach to thinking about the term. I think anytime that we use words, we need to be careful about what words we use and how we describe things because language is very important. I typically think of the word commit as being something that's positive. So best practice not to connect it with something so serious and so negative as suicide. But I will say you guys definitely educated me on that at your podcast and off your post because I had never thought about it that way. But I definitely can see how that can be misconstrued or place blame.
And also T-Kea enlightened me in regards to the terminology because sometimes, although clinicians are in school, right, we go and we're living life and we're learning these different terms. The field is evolving, which is a great thing, right? But I think also with using died by suicide versus committed also gives compassion to the family. It also gives compassion to the community, right? Because it helps to make it more comfortable to talk about it, and maybe even in talking about it in regards of died by suicide, it enlightens us into being able to have the conversation sooner rather than later because we are breaking that stigma.
And also, I would add, when we talk about a diagnosis, which I don't think is on script, but for instance, saying a person who say, I think you talked about this too, not making your diagnosis like your identity.
Yes.
So not I'm depressed. No, you're someone who's experiencing depression,
Right.
or a person who has bipolar disorder, or that person lives with bipolar disorder versus like, and I think you talked about like how when you do in your group, so I'll let you maybe elaborate on it, but I do think it's important that we don't attach our diagnosis to our identity and saying a person lives with this versus you are this.
So Jillian, before you answer that question, I wanted you to just define this really quick too. You mentioned person centered, and so I know that, right? Because I'm in the mental health field. But what does a person centered approach mean? And then if you can answer Takia's question.
Yeah, great question. So, person centered therapy, which is the practice that I take, essentially means that you're working collaboratively with your client, right? So, you don't come into a session with me with the expectation that I'm the expert and I'm going to fix you. No, I don't know you. I don't know your life. I don't know what you've been through. You're the expert on your own life and you're coming to me to help guide you. So we run through therapy together. I might give suggestions, I might give encouragement, I might tell you where I think you messed up. But you're essentially telling me about your life, and then I'm kind of walking through it with you. So person centered is kind of allowing the client or the person to be the expert of their own life and tell you where they think that they need help. And then it is also being very mindful that you're working with a human. You're not working with a lab rat. This is a real person with a real experience. So you're just wanting to be as empathetic to that as possible. You're wanting to be very understanding to their situation and looking at them kind of like holistically.
Okay. So one of the things I love about Jill's practice is that she does individual and group, right? And I think that that is beautiful. And not trying to just put you on the spotlight, sis. Sorry, but one of the things that I love about that is because sometimes people are intimidated by therapy, right? People are intimidated by sitting across from someone one on one. And also T-Kea and Jordan, I want to hear your input as well. Did you find that if you went to group therapy, it was helpful versus individual? And not saying that it's going to rule out or take over, but just kind of sharing your perspective of group versus individual. And Jillian, if you could just from the clinical and your personal background of like kind of why you incorporate both.
You go first.
So, I mean, I'm an advocate for both. And y'all don't know, but me and Jordan met in the hospital in group therapy. So I love group therapy. I love meeting other people. It often helps me make me feel like I'm less alone and other people get it. But I also love like I mean I love my therapist. So I they know because I talk about it all the time. So and I realized by working with a really good provider really does make a huge difference. So for some people they may prefer one over the other, but I actually like love both. And even Jill, she hosted a grief group. And I am somebody who's dealing with complex grief, and it's something that I'm still struggling with. But Jordan with me again to Jill's group, and it was so refreshing because other people could identify. They're like, yes, I'm angry too. Like I'm experiencing that emotion, and it creates a sense of community and makes you feel like you're not alone.
Yeah, so I personally love group therapy. I've done both, of course, group and individual. Again, Takia and I actually met at a partial hospitalization program. That's when you report to the hospital and you stay there for like 6, 7 hours throughout the day, and then you're able to go home at night as an alternative to actually being inpatient. So that's where we met. Again, you make fantastic connections in the hospital. You'll find out that what you're going through, you're not alone. There's other people who are experiencing the same thing that you're feeling. And you will be surprised because it'll be somebody who doesn't look like you, doesn't have the same resources you have. We're all still connected. So I thought that was like the power of group therapy. And if I didn't do it, I wouldn't have met Takia. So
Yes, everything you guys said, Kia, you especially, very beautifully said. I think that group therapy is so important to me because the community aspect. I think that there's nothing without community, and that one therapist alone can't do it all, right? I'm here to tell you. So I think that it is so important to have people in your corner, in your day to day life, people around you who can kind of understand what you're going through, have had similar experiences. I can't tell you how many people come to my groups and they're like, oh my goodness, you too? No, I thought I was the only person. And you realize that your experience is actually a lot more normal than it may feel when you're just alone with your thoughts. So that's the one really valuable part. And then the other valuable part is exactly what Courtney said earlier is like therapists go to school, right? We go to college, we get our masters, we learn all of these theories on how to work with people, but you guys are not a sum of different theories that somebody came up with 100 years ago, right? Like that's what we learn and that's how we're taught to practice. I kind of like put all of that in a corner and I meet with people and I say like, who are you actually and how do I really think that I should connect with this person based on what they're presenting to me? not from something that I read in a book. But people don't realize that there's therapists out there that do that, and therapy can be really intimidating to people. So, coming to a group where you're more surrounded by people who are just like you rather than this power dynamic of client versus therapist, I think can really be a helpful icebreaker and allow people to be more comfortable and share in a way that they might not with just their clinician, especially about topics like suicide. You guys would be surprised. I think a therapy session is probably the safest place to discuss suicide, but a lot of people don't bring it up unless they're directly asked because they're afraid that they're going to get, excuse me, sent to the hospital.
So we talked about social media, right? And I love social media because you get to hear about people's personal experience. And there's been this term where people have talked about a grippy sock vacation, right? And shining light. And so for those that don't know what a grippy sock is, typically when you get hospitalized, whether it's you're having a baby or you're, just getting checked out, rather than walking in your regular shoes, they give you grippy socks, right? But there are some people who've used that terminology of a grippy sock vacation to connect it to a mental health hospitalization, right? So you guys talked about your meeting and a partial hospitalization. I'm going to assume, but correct me if I'm wrong. It probably was after being hospitalized, right? So typically in mental health, there are certain treatment levels that people go through. Hospitalization is like the most secure and intensive one. But I wanted to just talk about that in regards of when we talk about like suicidal ideation, feelings, attempts. Most people don't share because they're afraid of going to the hospital. What was your experience of going to the hospital?
So I actually was not in therapy at this time. Well, I did have my therapist, but I was avoiding her at the time. So I actually, so I had texted a friend and I told the friend, it would be better if I wasn't here. And so that friend immediately went into action and the police showed up at my house. I already had taken all the substances and was kind of just hoping I would go in my sleep. And so that was how I got there. It wasn't and the reason why I never brought it up in therapy was because I often like to talk about, if you're a millennial, you know about the movie Good Burger. So I used to think that I was gonna go. It's like a scene where like people, they look very zombie like, and so I thought I was gonna go into the hospital and I was gonna see people like this. So I was like, I'm not trying to go in, into the hospital. So I was very fearful of that. But when I got there, it was not like that. So I know for me that's why, because I'm like, oh my God, they're gonna lock me up. Am I gonna be able to keep a job or like all of that stuff that kind of comes with it? And so I was very fearful because of like what I saw on TV and what I was told.
I have something to say about that too, because I used to work at a hospital. I don't know if anyone's heard of PIW in DC, but I used to work there and it's crazy. I pray y'all never have to go there. But I think that aside from that hospital, any other hospital would be a very good and almost humbling experience, right? Because I think when you go to the hospital and you're going essentially, for example, for suicidal ideation, and otherwise your life seems kind of normal, right? You might work a job, you might be a parent, you might be a homeowner, but you're also dealing with suicidal ideation. That alone should be taken as seriously as the illnesses that the zombies are dealing with, right? And you go into the hospital and you're all thrown in together and you realize like, wow, my mental illness is no better or worse than anybody else's, and it should all be taken very seriously. And suicidal ideation is equally as treated as schizophrenia or some of the more serious ones. And I think you don't realize that until you're kind of in an environment with people who may appear sicker than you, and you're all on the same floor. You might have one be rooming with one.
Yeah, I know for myself, the first time that I went to the hospital, I was actually involuntarily committed. I went
Jordan,
to,
I'm a stop. What does it mean to be involuntarily
oh,
committed?
yes, I'm sorry. So,
Exactly how it sounds.
yes, precisely. So, I was an involuntary admit. People are familiar with the California Code 5150. I was actually in Georgia, which is a 1013, and here in Maryland, correct me if I'm wrong, it's an EP. E is in eggs, P is in Paul, which is an emergency petition. And that's when you're deemed a danger to yourself or someone else. And for that reason, they're not going to let you leave the hospital. They're actually going to keep you normally for like a 72-hour hold. If you are involuntarily committed, they may hold you a little bit longer. But the very first time I went to the hospital, I was an undergrad in Atlanta, and I went to see a psychologist through my school. And I had this night where I was feeling so depressed, and I was going to go to the kitchen and I was going to get a knife and I was going to, and I went to my psychologist, excuse me, the next day and told her about it. And she was like, "Oh, really?" I said, "Yes." So I was telling her about the night, and she said, "I think you need to go to the hospital." And I told her, "Okay, great. You know what? I'm going to go home. I'll pack a bag. I'll go to the hospital the next morning. I promise you I'll go." And she was like, "Mm-mm." So I actually ended up in the back of a police car, and they carried me all the way from downtown Atlanta all the way to the west side to Smyrna to a it was a hospital for mental health. And y'all, I was so upset. Oh, I was so upset. I did my mandatory 72-hour bid. My mom, bless her heart, she drove all the way from Maryland down to Georgia to come see me in the hospital. Um, but you know what? I think I was like you. I had the expectation that it was going to be a wild place. And I actually really enjoyed my time in the hospital. I think it all depends on where you go to and your disposition in being there. If you're open to the information, it is really, really helpful. Again, the first time I was involuntarily committed, but I actually went to the hospital 3 other times of my own volition. That's how helpful it was for me. So I wouldn't write it off. It's definitely valuable.
And I would say, so I was also very mad at my friend. Like I was peed off. Like I was mad that, but in retrospect now, I'm like, wow, she did it because she actually cared. But they gave me the option. So when the police officer showed up, they was like, we'll give you two options. They was like, we can handcuff you, but that's another event as to why we shouldn't handcuff people with mental health challenges. We can handcuff you, or either we can call the paramedics. And I'm like, well, I've never been arrested, so I think I'm gonna take the the other option. And when I got to the hospital, I also told them like what I had done, and they gave me the option too. They're like, "Well, you can check yourself in, or we'll check you in." And I'm like, "Dang, both options gonna put me in the same place, so it doesn't really matter." But I was just like, you know what? At this point, I'm already here, so I actually at that point had checked myself in.
Yeah, me too. So even though I was taken there initially involuntarily, I was able to convert over to a voluntary admit. And again, you just end up staying a little bit shorter than you would if you were involuntary. But yep.
And then you talked about like different levels of care. So once I was out of inpatient, then that's when I went to the day hospital
Same.
where I stayed for 6, 7 hours, go home, and then go back the next day for like 2 to 3 weeks, and then you're discharged. And then from there, you usually go back to your therapist weekly or however you have it scheduled.
And really quick, I'm sorry, I have to say, you guys have to remember that your therapist is on your side, right? We don't just wake up like, "Ooh, I'm gonna send Marcus to the hospital today," okay? No, we don't do that. We act off what you present to us, and you literally hire us to essentially be a more sound version of your own mind, right? So if we come in and you tell me that last night you had a knife to your neck, I mean, sis, you needed help, right? So that's kind of our job. And it sounds to me like your therapist was very collaborative with you. She didn't go to the bathroom and you came back and there were, so anytime that I've ever sent somebody to the hospital, it's always been a conversation, as supportive and collaborative as possible. Do you need to call anybody before you go? Are there any important numbers that we need to write down? Is there anybody that we should let know that we're going to do this? It's never a secret or something that's done maliciously. And if it is, then that's probably a really good indicator that that's not the therapist for you.
And I want to go off of what you just said in regards of it's a collaboration, right? Even with the hospitals, a lot of times we have this thought because we think of one flew over the cuckoo's nest, right? Of like, I'm going to be here and I'm going to be stuck here. There have been a lot of changes, progress, and accountability in regards to hospitals and mental health facilities that different each state. Like I'm from New Jersey. I've worked in a insurance company, so I've had people who were hospitalized in all different states. Each one operates a bit differently. Pretty much like you said, whether they're holding you because you are involuntary, you really are not present mentally to make the best decision, but there's a certain timeline in regards of how long they can keep you. And then, like you said, Jordan, of converting over. So converting over from involuntary to now, hey, maybe the medication's working, and now I'm able to be aware of what my decision is. I'm ready to sign for a longer stay. But I will say this: you get out, whether it's individual, whatever stage of treatment you are in, or your loved one is in, you get from it what you want, right? If you don't want to be there, if you want to be guarded, there are some people who are having mandatory treatment therapy. They come in, they sit quietly, and you're like, therapy didn't work. And it's like, okay, but you didn't want it to work, right? A lot of therapists, we don't want to do, like, we don't want to do it where it's like just to be in front of you and smile. We really want to get into this practice because we want to help people. We want to care, and we do care for those who are sitting with us. And it's a partnership, like Jill mentioned. Another form of partnership, and T-Kea has educated me about this because each state, once again, is different. There are certain states where I believe Maryland has done this very well. Um, there are other states that are developing this, but it is peer support. And can you guys just share what peer support is, how it works?
So I guess I'll start and then Jordan will go. So in the state of Maryland, we have an entire certification board and they te- treat us like we about to be clinical professionals. We are non-clinical, but we have to have to take trainings on trauma-informed care, person-centered language, mental health first aid. And basically we used our lived experience, but also with evidence-based training to assist others. So sometimes you could think of a sponsor or a coach. Those are some states may call them a community health worker, a consumer health worker. In the state of Maryland, some people, Jordan will speak about recovery coaches. It could be a recovery coach, but essentially is a person with lived experience who also has some background training, and we used our lived experience. So we do not diagnose, we do not treat. But when I've worked at mental health organizations, I've led support groups. So I would use my lived experience. So sometimes people may go to like AA, and I've worked at Shepherd Pratt and some other mental health organizations where I would go and I would work one on one with individuals and I would help them to develop a wellness recovery or wellness plan. We would talk about anything in terms of whether it was social media or what was going on. And we don't necessarily give them advice. It's more so listening and it's more so the peer aspect in terms of mentoring and coaching. And they may not be as far along in their recovery. So, like when I was leading a support group, there was um, a woman who was there and she was like, oh my gosh, she's like, I'm a Christian. I was told I was going to go to hell if I kill myself. And she was like, how did you get to the other side? She's like, you're the first person that has ever, I never knew that peer support could be so valuable. And the difference with the clinician is if a clinician does have some sort of a mental health history, they cannot disclose that. That is against their ethical code of conduct. But when it comes to peer support, that's great because it comes into play where we can share our lived experience and we're also trained when to disclose it because it's still about the peer. We don't call them clients because we don't want to do the power dynamic, but it's still up to them. So we still work with them and they're guiding the process. But again, we're just using our lived experience and sharing when it's appropriate.
Yeah, there's definitely something very valuable about having someone who's been through where you are to help you get to the other side. So myself, my experience being a peer is a little different from Takia's because I actually worked on the substance use side and I have no lived experience with substance use at all. But I
worked again at MedStar, I would talk to people in the emergency room who was using alcohol or any substances. With alcohol, it depended upon how much they were consuming and how frequently they were consuming. But I would talk to anyone, even if someone used marijuana, I had to go and talk to them. I also worked at an inpatient center, Western Maryland, that people would come in if they needed to stay for inpatient substance use treatment. And there's really something valuable in having someone who's been through what you're going through to help you through it. And again, it's great that we're able to share our experience where a clinician wouldn't be able to do so. And it's really powerful. More people should become peers for sure.
They really do treat us like we're social workers, but it's important because we have to be educated not just on our experience, but in terms of just the background in terms of mental health as well, so that you can be most effective.
Yeah, you have to be professionals, you know, you have to still learn the art of therapy as well. And you guys have. So, like you said, more people definitely should because it is really valuable to have somebody without that power dynamic.
So I know peer support is, would you say, is it a treatment option? Is it a benefit or added thing? And if it isn't a treatment option, what are some other treatment options for those dealing with suicide?
So, peer support, I would caution and say is not treatment, but I would say that it can be a support in addition to treatment. So, there were organizations that I worked for where I was on the team, and they had their therapists, they had their psychiatrists. They also had a job coach where people who have mental health diagnosis, where they actually help them get jobs, because for some people it is a disability. They get a check for disability because it becomes that debilitating. And then they had me as a peer. So I was able to advocate for, I will say, appear from my perspective, but advocate for the therapist client, if you will, because I had that peer perspective. And so I would say it's great because you kind of think about like wrap around kind of care. So I would say it's not treatment, but it is an addition that could be supportive, especially if there's a wait list for therapists. And some people may be like, I can't get into therapy, so let me go to a peer support group or let me work with a peer. So it can be great, especially if there's a wait list for therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say what you're describing is what I would consider to be a treatment team. I think anybody who's dealing with any form of mental illness, small or large, you should have a treatment team. So that should consist of multiple people, which is why it's a team, right? So your therapist, your psychiatrist, maybe you have a case manager, maybe you have a peer, maybe you're in a support group, maybe you're in AA. These are all people who are your treatment team and they're all working with you. If you have a child that's dealing with mental illness, maybe they have a school counselor or a school psychologist that works in partnership with their therapist. So they have someone that's in and out of the school. And this is important because, like I said, all of those people who I just listed are just one people. And most of those clinicians or professionals are also dealing with tons of other clients so that they're not always available to just tend to you and what's going on with you in that moment. I know myself, I have over 30 clients that I see in a week. So I know that there's a lot of different things going on. And every time that I meet with a new person, I have to pretend like it's only that person, right? Like it's only their situation. When really in the back of my mind, there's like 29 other situations. So it's important to have somebody other than just me who you can turn to if maybe I'm in another session or if I'm on vacation or if I'm not available. Because if you only have one person and they're not available, then you left feeling very defeated, like there's nobody there to help.
Yeah, so in addition to, having, of course, clinicians are always important, peer support, there's also community-based support. So for instance, a prime example of that would be NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and they have support groups that you can go to virtually or in person. I've attended the groups, yes, for free 99. You do not have to pay a thing. Chances are, I know all the counties in Maryland have a NAMI chapter that you can check out. If you go to their website, you can find the virtual meetings, in person meetings, and it's a great place to go and actually find connection You don't have to you don't have to go through what you're going through alone. There's also Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance. They're kind of the same thing as NAMI. You can go into support groups. There's 12-step meetings if you're dealing with any substance use issues. There's actually a lot of community and free based support. Therapy for Black girls is helpful. Yeah.
So if you scan that QR code with the program, the last like there are two pages in there with like national resources, and then there's another page with like some Maryland-based resources.
So now this is my favorite time, right? You guys got to hear me ask questions, the panelists answer, but we wanted to make this event inclusive and interactive, right? So at the beginning of the event, Randy mentioned that there were index cards on the tables with markers for you to ask a question. So if we could just have the volunteers go around, and if you have or need more time, let them know. But this is a time for you guys to ask the questions that you would like to ask the questions that you would like the panelists to answer.
And you don't need to write your names on them, so no one will know who asked what. So ask away and be as open and honest as you would like.
So while they're doing that, I guess what brought you into this type of work? So whether it's peer support, Jillian as a therapist, what brought you into doing the work that you do?
Yeah, okay. Well, it was my lived experience. I was not trying to do anything mental health related. My background is communications, marketing, publicity. I did work as work with BET Networks, TV One. That was my thing. So that's why like I thrive in. If y'all see the graphics and all that stuff, that's that's me. And so it was a great experience doing like Black Girls Rock, the Soul Train Awards, but it was because of my lived experience that I was like, there's so much more. And I want to be able to use my lived experience as well as with storytelling and content development to be able to share my experience, but work with people. So for me, it's a great way to kind of merge my background with communications and media, but then also the new skills and the training that I've developed through um, peer support.
Well, I answered pretty much in the beginning, but like I said, I lost my dad to suicide, and I think that that really prompted me to want to have more understanding about mental illness. Like I said, I had no idea. I was a 15-year-old kid, never had any experience with mental illness or the like. So that really prompted me to want to take classes and have more of an understanding about mental illness and mental health. So I started taking psychology in my senior year of high school, and I absolutely loved it. I mean, even aside from my loss and my personal experience, I really just love the course content. So when I went to college, I went to St. John's University in New York. I really had no idea what I wanted to study, but I knew that I had to go to college. So I thought really hard about what I wanted my major to be. And I think that psychology was the thing that just continued to stuck with me as far as course content that was actually interesting to me, that could translate into a career. And once I started taking my classes there, I really fell in love with it and had different internships and amazing opportunities, networking with a lot of people in the field. And it really just became more and more of a passion for me.
I would add, kind of going back, sorry, about social media. I met Jill on social media, y'all, on TikTok because her video went viral. So we talk about the power of social media. There's also good that comes out of social media as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think I was inspired to actually pursue this endeavor with T-Kea just out of a sense of loneliness. And I knew that if I was isolating and if I felt like I was going through this alone, that other people had to feel the same way I did. And so that's really why I wanted to pursue something in mental health, just because I didn't want my story and my life to be for nothing. I knew if it's not just me, so I wanted to help other people.
So I just got the chance to breeze through some of these questions, and y'all are amazing. Okay, because some of these questions, I'm like, this is a really good one. Just due to time and respect for each person that wrote a question, I may just direct it to one individual person. And please just keep it short and sweet. So, how can young people know who to speak to if they feel they have no support? So I'm going, Jordan. Oh, Jill. Okay.
Sorry, say it again.
Okay. How can young people know who to speak to if they feel they have no support?
Okay. Well, that's a really complex question. I think you have to really check in with what you mean when you say no support, right? So we all have to understand what the word support means. And support actually has to feel supportive. So just because you have somebody in your home or in your life doesn't mean that they necessarily support you. So that is a really tricky situation. And I think it really requires you as the young person to have trust and a little bit of a leap of faith and just tell who you can, right? Whether it's a teacher, whether it's a friend who has a really cool parent, or whether it's a guidance counselor, whoever, even if you don't necessarily feel that they support you, I can tell you that as a young person, you have a lot of privilege, right? Because most adults are unable to hear certain things and just kind of let them happen, right? So even if they don't feel like they're supportive of you, they might be in a position where they're forced to, and that might connect you to the person who actually is supportive of you. So in that case, as difficult as it may seem, just put yourself out there and try talking to whoever you feel most comfortable with, even if it's just a little ounce of comfort.
Okay. So the next question, how can a person with lived experience, mental health challenges share their lived experiences with their family and friends? And I'm going to ask that to Jordan.
I think don't be afraid to let your family and your friends in on what's going on with you because you'll be very, very surprised at how much support you may just receive from them. I know for myself, I was personally very afraid to tell my family. I come from some very strong women, and it felt so bad for me because I felt like I was almost letting them down in a way. And I didn't want to talk to my mom about my mental health issues. But, when you open up to your family and your friends, you'll be very, very surprised at, how responsive they will be to you and how supportive they'll probably be.
So quickly, I would add, what I did was I sent YouTube videos about anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder. I also wrote articles that were published, so I would just send them the articles, and that also helped because it prompted a conversation. So you can also do that as well.
T-Kea, I'm going to ask you this. How would you help someone who is suicidal and has intellectual disabilities?
I'm sorry, I'm going to pong that to Jill.
Yeah, that is a tricky one, right? Anybody who has intellectual disabilities, hopefully by now, has some sort of team or some sort of more higher level care of support. And I definitely think that if they're dealing with suicidal ideation, as anybody, it should be taken very seriously. But definitely a conversation for the entire treatment team because they are probably somebody who needs extra assistance in every area of their life. So I think that whoever is on their support team needs to be on the same page about whatever their care plan is going to be.
Sorry, I'm trying to think which one to answer, but I like this because there's two. So there was the question of, do you see many instances of resistance to therapy because of religious beliefs, such as just pray it away? And then also, what role should religion or the church play into therapy? I knew you were gonna All right, so just a quick background. So I am a therapist, obviously, but I also incorporate faith and religion and spirituality into the therapy sessions, tailored to each client. So every client is different, right? There are some people who believe that that help is available because God obviously called people into this role, right? And I believe that faith and spirituality are should be incorporated in. However, we have people who are prideful, right, which is or just ignorant, right, and not to throw shade or shame, but just because they are in regards of what the importance of therapy is. So they'll say just pray it away, right, and it goes back to T-Kea mentioning before, especially in the Black community, this thought of slavery, right, where it's just push it away, right, keep focus on what's in front of you, don't try and look behind or look in the past, just keep going. And so we'll say pray it away, but we understand now as mental health therapists as well as people who have had lived experience, it's not that easy, right? You can't just pray away anxiety, you can't just pray away depression. There are some other tools that are needed, whether it's learning your coping skills, speaking it out freely, or using medication. And so there are, but I don't think that because if you integrate or go into one aspect that it means that you shy away from your faith. But I do think that in regards to the Black community and the church community, is that something that we need to be able to bridge together and not be have one exclusive of the other.
Because I was told like you just need to speak in tongues for 20 minutes a day, and that depression just gonna go away. I'm like, I don't even know how to do that. So and so I think it can play, but I know for me, even though yes, I do identify as a Christian, I actually don't want my faith a part of my therapy. But some people do, and that's okay for them. So I think it's important to know what works for that person. And I also because of they meant well, their hearts were pure, but because of their lack of education, it also pushed me away from the church for a very long time. Like Courtney, me and Courtney are childhood friends, so we grew up next door. I like, don't pray for me. I don't want to talk about the church. Don't talk about God. But because it was just, I had so much hurt. But then looking back, I realized they just didn't have the education. So that's why I say take mental health first aid, any sort of mental health training that you could take. I guess I could put a plug. You could take it with me because I'm an instructor. But take those trainings because it will help you to better understand and not just be like, oh, just pray it away. You'll be fine.
And really quick, I just have to add too, is that faith is a very personal experience. Nobody can tell you to have a certain relationship with Christ or whoever your higher power, or to incorporate or not incorporate faith into your therapy. If somebody is telling you just pray it away and that doesn't connect with your inner core values, then you know that that's not the person who's most supportive of your journey, right? Yes, they may be supporting you in a way that feels comfortable for them, beautiful, great. But that might not be the person that you want to continue to speak to about your battles with suicidal ideation or other mental health issues.
So I'm gonna do two more. Is there a different approach in regards to a man versus a woman seeking therapy?
Seeking?
Well, I'm just do you? Oh, sorry. Do you have a different approach to a man versus woman?
I have a different approach for every human that walks through my door because everybody is different. So everybody gets a different level of treatment. I mean, I treat everybody very much like an individual. I don't have any one way that I do therapy. And I think that people who do the approach thing are less successful because you're trying to put everybody under one umbrella. So yeah, I talk differently to my men than I do to my women. I can't tell you how many wife haters that I have come in. And I'm like, yeah, I'm with you. But if it's a husband hater, sis, I'm with you. You know, it's all about who's right in front of you.
And I will add to that there are different studies, right, who have showed we tailor therapy to the client, right? But there's also different ways that mental health challenges show up and manifest between a man and a woman. Then you go a little bit deeper between race, Black, Caucasian, right? So there are certain things where we do tailor it in regards to symptomology, right? It's just in regards of saying, okay, this person is presenting more angry, but does that mean that they actually have aggression or could it be depression?
And you also have to think about the way in which you connect, right? So, like, for example, I'm a woman, I might have a male client come in. I might not be able to relate to your exact experience, but I can think of a time where, oh, wow, I didn't go through that thing, but I remember feeling guilty about something, or I remember feeling under appreciated about something, and trying to find that connection and jump off of that rather than trying to. I think people dismiss therapy because they're like, well, they will never understand. They have never been through what I've been through. I don't think it's about connecting with somebody who's been exactly through what you've been through, but it's about finding that human connection and that experience or that commonality.
The last. So, in regards to, how do you help a friend that is feeling depressed? And I like the.
I'm like, okay. So everybody is different. And I always say the best thing to ask the person, how can I best support you? I felt like that sounds very therapeutic. But but no, because a lot of people are experts in their own life. So ask them. So I know, and I Jordan is Jordan is my ride or die. Like for real. When I'm struggling and I have moments sometimes of I've had moments since coming out of the hospital where I've struggled with suicidal ideation, and Jordan is that person. So, and I will actually tell her, "What do I need? Can you come over?" Or sometimes I'm gonna shout some. I have other people who will drop off food, other people who will come and help me clean up. It's literally like some of the same things that you would do if a person was physically sick. Like when a person is struggling with depression, a lot of times they feel debilitated or crippled and they can't do simple tasks where you make like, oh, just wash your clothes or just take a bath. And so I even had friends will come over and be like, come on, T-Kea, you gotta get out of bed. We need you to take a shower. And so like even just helping people with physical things. And I know for me, a big thing is like my love language is quality time. So Jordan knows if I'm struggling, like she's just gonna come over. So and other people will DoorDash me food. So just kind of thinking, I think sometimes we make it so complicated, but it's not. Sometimes people want to talk about it, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they just want somebody physically there to know that they care.
Agreed.
Agreed.
I got the clinician sign off. Boom, boom. So
Yeah, I think definitely one of the most powerful things that you can do is just be there. Ask them what they need. If they're not sure what they need, just express that you're with them. If they need anything, to reach back out to you. Doesn't have to be something elaborate. Again, T-Kea, she knows if she's going through something, hey, I need you to come over. Usually I'm going to drop what I'm doing and I'm going to come over. That's just the type of friend that I am. I know that's the support that she needs. So definitely, yeah, ask people what they need and they'll tell you.
and if they just say they don't know, then maybe help them explore some options. But don't tell them what you think they should do because people don't respond well to, especially adults.
Well, thank you so much for writing in the questions. If there are any questions that we did not get to, I'm so sorry. Just due to time, and I will leave it up to Jordan and T-Kea in regards of what to do with those questions.
It's Jordan again. That was our first live event. If you were able to attend in person, we thank you so much for your support. And if this is your first time hearing this information that was presented, we hope you find it helpful. For information on this week's resource, you can check out the show notes or the description box. You'll also find out how you can connect to Jillian and Courtney. See you all in 2 weeks. Bye.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jordan, co-founder and associate director of Black People Die by Suicide 2.
It's your girl Kea.
The better half.
T-Kea, I am the co-founder and executive director of Black People Die by Suicide 2.
So our organization is looking for people to donate their time to serve on committees to help us with our mission to normalize the conversation about suicide in the Black community, provide resources to those who need it, and most importantly, inspire hope in the hopeless. So we're looking for people to serve on several different aspects. One of them being like a peer support committee. So if you're someone with lived experience and you work in the field of peer support, we would absolutely love for you to reach out to us for that. You could provide advisement on different things that we're looking to do as peers. We also have a program committee that's going to consider what type of things do we want to offer in the future. What type of programs would we like to extend to individuals that will help benefit their mental health? We also have a finance committee. Of course, that would be, that would assist the treasurer in keeping the finances straight.
And then we have our other committees, which is the development committee. And y'all, if you got experience with fundraising, we need you.
We need you.
Grant writing, all of that stuff, it takes money to run a nonprofit and organization. And we need you. If you have experience with grant writing or development, anything that's related with funding for nonprofits, we would love to have you sit on the development committee. We also have the communications committee. Now, look, T-Kea want all the help. Communications, marketing, y'all, I'm telling y'all right now, I could use the help. All things communications, it's just T-Kea, and we need the help. So we would love to have you. So if you have experience in PR, marketing, communications, or if you just want to learn and you're interested in doing that, you can also be on our communications committee.
We also have a peer support committee, the finance committee, and a program committee. So if you or someone you know would be interested in helping us out, that would be fantastic. We're at a very grassroots stage with our organization. So this is a wonderful time to be on board if you want to support our mission. Send us an email to info@blackpeoplediebysuicide2.org. Again, that's info@blackpeoplediebysuicide2.org. We would absolutely love to have you on board.
Yes, because then they could say, y'all could say y'all was with us in the trenches.
Yes.
You know? So get on the train now while it's just, right, it's just getting there. So, but yeah, as Jordan mentioned, feel free to email us info@blackpeoplediebysuicide2.org. We would love to have you on the committee. We have some amazing things that are cooking up, and we would love for you to be a part of it. This episode was sponsored by the Mental Health Empowerment Agency, where its mission is to dismantle the mental health stigma and raise awareness of suicide prevention through curated events, individual and group peer support, digital and social media, and educational trainings.